for living with Bishop Dale C. Bronner.
Notice the word of the Lord here, Psalm 127. Unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. And unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. It is vain for you to rise up early, to sit up late, to eat the bread of sorrows. For so he gives his beloved sleep. Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth. And happy is the man who has his quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, but they shall speak with their enemies in the gate. And I'm simply talking today from the subject, unless the Lord. Unless the Lord. This is really a family psalm written, dedicated to Solomon by his father David. Solomon having a house to build and a city to keep and a seed to raise up to his father David. He directs him to look to God and to depend upon God's providence, without which all of Solomon's even great wisdom would serve no purpose except the Lord. Unless the Lord builds something, unless the Lord, I want you to see the pattern here in verse 1 is that unless the Lord builds or watches, our building or our watching is useless. It is in vain. My efforts are useless apart from the Lord's. If I just try to do something without God's help, is useless. My work is fruitless and ineffective without God. If God is not added to the work, if I'm not joining him in his present work, then everything that I do is useless. I mean, though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, and if I don't have love in my heart, I'm a sounding brass or tinkling cymbal. I mean, if God is not in it, see, God is love, 1 John 4:8. If love is not a part of what you're doing, if love is not your motivation, then it will come to naught. If love is not the motivation, unless the Lord, if you try to do something and unless the Lord is in it, it is in vain. It is totally in vain. And I want you to realize this psalm is really about the family. And unless God really helps you to build a strong family, your labor is in vain. God has the ability to even invade a household of people who have no regard for him. Because all that he needed in the Old Testament was for one lamb for every household. That's what the Jewish Passover is about. It is that lamb that was placed there that remembered how God delivered them out of the land of Egypt and out of the house of bondage. There was a lamb for every household. Just all that he needed was one lamb. And if you put the blood of that lamb over the doorpost, everything in the house was saved. And sometimes that's all that God needs, is just one person in the house. You might wonder, why am I the only one in my family? Why am I the only one on my job? All he needed was one in the house. If he can get the blood of just one lamb on that house, if he can get one believer, if he can just get one person saved. And this reminds us how we must be so dependent upon God's blessings and not on our own contrivance for the raising of our families. If anybody in this day and time raises a good family, they cannot, if they will be honest with you, take all of the credit themselves. You can send your children to the finest of institutions, and your child can still bust hell wide open. It's not enough to be educated. It is not enough to have the best kind of training and exposed and taken in various trips around the world, because all that it takes is one corrupt thug to get their hands on your child and put their evil influence on your child, and everything that you have labored so desperately for all of the days of your life can be undone because your child comes in contact with a witch who has a purpose of messing up their destiny, or some kind of a dog who came to break their heart and to leave them in utter confusion and dismay. All that it takes is just one person to enter in, one wrong person to enter into your child's life to mess them up. And that's why unless the Lord build a house, and that word house there is a family. It's a family. When you talk about the house of David, it wasn't a place of brick and mortar and sheetrock. This is a family. Except the Lord, unless the Lord build the family, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord watch the city, the watchman watches but in vain. And so there's not enough that we have within our own ability to be able to watch out for all of the potential dangers that could happen in our life. I mean, to watch and think that if we had watchmen, somebody could come by and slay your watchman. Somebody, as smart as thieves are right now, we've got some educated, technologically advanced thieves nowadays. They know how to circumvent your alarm system. They know how to disconnect wires so that the phone won't even call the alarm company. And they can circumvent the best of alarm systems. I hope that your real sense of security doesn't come from a fence that they can scale and get over, or an alarm system, or a guard who's at the door, because then your house is still vulnerable, because an earthquake could come and level it to the ground. A tornado could come, a hurricane could come, a fire could come, a flood could come. That's why unless the Lord watch the city, the watchman watches but in vain. There were some people recently in the tornado in Joplin. They saw the tornado coming. They saw, but they couldn't do a thing about it. They saw it, but when God watches the city, there could be a storm aimed at your house. And when the Lord, He has the authority to rebuke the storm and say, peace, be still. He can cause the enemy to stay his hand. When you are laboring with everything that is on the inside of you to raise up a strong family, we can't do it in and of our own strength. We've got to partner with God. Unless the Lord watch the city, the watchman watches but in vain. And let me just remind you today that the safest place on earth is the will of God. The safest place on earth, it is the will of God. And when we experience God in our family, when we experience God in our lives, then our children are impacted by it. When you have an experience with God, that experience will introduce you to the presence of God, number one. It will introduce you into God's presence. We come into God's presence. And when the presence of God comes into your life, there's certain things that just absolutely take over your life when the presence of God is there. When God, just by His presence, God's presence alone speaks. If you can ever feel God with you, a comfort comes over your life. You know that you're in good company if the presence of the Lord is here. And God promised, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Lo, I am with you now, even unto the end of the world. I'm with you. I will never let my presence leave you. The presence of God brings with it, number two, the protection of God. It brings God's protection into your life. You need God to protect you from some of the wiles of the devil. There are people that are scheming against you while you sleep. But I thank God that God watches over us. He neither slumbers nor sleeps. And He watches when other people don't like you and are hoping that you fail and that something terrible happens to you. We have a God who watches over us. That even though you can't see your children because they might be out in their own place, but you know, when your children get off of your knees, they'll still be on your heart. And you have to still pray for them that the protection of God will come over their life, and that God will protect them from hurt, harm, danger, molestations, accidents, all kinds of schemes that are against them, disease, all kinds of things trying to snap their minds and make their emotions unstable. You need divine protection that comes by the presence of God. You know how if you were in trouble and years ago, if your daddy stepped up, you might have been spineless and pusillanimous before your daddy showed up. But when your daddy's presence steps up in front of the baddest bully, all of a sudden you get a confidence because the presence of the Father is there. When God's presence comes, He brings with it His divine protection. His divine protection. The divine protection of God then leads us into number three, God's peace. You'll come in to the peace of God that passes all understanding. It is a peace that comes from God. This is a gift from God. It floods every family. If you can get God's presence, experience his presence, then it brings God's protection over your house. Then it will bring his peace. Along with this also comes next, number 4, it brings the purpose of God. God's purpose. You don't even know what your purpose is for until you get in contact with the manufacturer. He knows the purpose. He knows the purpose. Even when you don't understand the purpose, God says, I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. And Jeremiah 29:11. He knows those plans. And he said, I've got plans, great plans for you. I've got a purpose for your life. I have a purpose for your life. And then it leads us into the 5th thing that God brings us, which when God comes, he brings his power. God's power. His power comes for purpose. If you don't know your purpose, why should God trust you with his power? Power is for purpose. If you have power but don't understand its purpose, you will abuse it. I know some leaders who are abusive today because they don't understand the purpose of the power. And then they use their power to hurt people and to be condescending toward other people because they don't understand that the power that God gives you is to help others, not to oppress others. We're not to have dominion over other people. We'll have dominion over the fowl of the air, the fish of the sea, all of that. But never did he give us dominion over another human being. You ought to have dominion over your gift. Over your gift, not other people. We're not to have dominion over other people. Other folks ought to have dominion over things that are in the earth. We subdue the earth. And so God's power comes where there's a revelation of his purpose. And once you get the power of God brings with it also the provision of God. It brings the provision of God. We've got to have God to be able to provide for us. Do you realize that it was the presence of God with Israel, his chosen people? It was God's presence with them that brought God's protection over their life, that brought the peace of God into their hearts, that brought them an understanding of God's purpose in the earth for them, that gave them God's power. And because they were still under God's presence of the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night, he provided for them. It brought his divine provision into their life. And he provided quail, and he provided manna, and he gave them water to drink out of the rock. God provides because the good shepherd always provides for his sheep. And all of that comes as a result of having God's presence. That's why unless the Lord build the house, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord build the house, they labor in vain. And I want you to realize that the Lord's laboring is primary and my laboring is secondary. Mine is not unimportant and mine is not unnecessary. It is just not first and is not the most important. So the reasonable question for me to ask is, Lord, what are you building here? What are you building here? Or, Lord, where are you watching? Where are you watching? And what are you seeing? What are you seeing? Except the Lord build the house. And it blesses our life in an incredible way to see the goodness of God in the land of the living. I'm so grateful that God is such an awesome God. But no matter which direction that God leads you, you ought to decide, make up in your mind, I am going to enjoy the journey. Success is not about a destination. It's about a journey. It's about a journey. When you go on vacation, don't wait to get to the beach to enjoy it. You ought to start relaxing as soon as you get outside of the city limits. On your way to the airport, you ought to be humming. You ought to be having a party the night before. I ain't got to go to work tomorrow. You ought to be having your party on your way. Joy is in the journey. Don't wait for it to be at the destination. I don't have to wait until I'm laying out on the beach. I'm having my joy in the journey. I'm humming, singing on my way, whistling down the corridor of the airport. I am having joy in the journey. I'm not going to wait for a destination. If you're waiting for some special thing to make you happy, to meet Mr. Right and Miss Right, listen, you better have your party now. You better celebrate now. I was a happy man when I was single, and now I'm a happy married man. And I'm telling you, if you're looking for somebody else to be the source of your happiness, You are putting an unreasonable expectation on them of something that they cannot sustain over a protracted period of time. You got to have two whole healthy people coming together to have a whole relationship. If you got this one that's jacked up and that one that's jacked up, and they coming together and think that they're going to all of a sudden marry and live happily ever after, life doesn't quite work that way. You got to find somebody who's already having joy in the journey. Boy, I was singing and praising God before I ever met my wife. I was serving him. I was waking up in the morning. Bless the Lord, oh my soul, and all that is within me. Bless his holy name. I was happy as a single man, and I'm happy now as a married man. As long as you know the Lord is with you, you ought to celebrate. It doesn't matter where you are, it matters who you are with. As long as the Lord is with you and as long as the Lord is for you, you ought to rejoice in the journey. Rejoice in the journey, because God will take you places that you never imagined. He will take you places, I declare it, that God will take you places that you never ever imagined. And remember that the journey is just as important as the destination. If you don't take the journey, you can't get to the destination. So you ought to declare that no matter what, I'm going to rejoice in the Lord and be glad. No matter what, I don't care what happens. If somebody gets sick, if somebody dies along the way, I'm going to rejoice in the Lord no matter what. If I have setbacks, I'm going to rejoice in the Lord. If something gets locked up, I'm going to rejoice in the Lord. If I get downsized, I'm going to rejoice in the Lord. There's always something to rejoice about. Don't wait for this sweet day and the sweet by and by. You better enjoy your pie on your way to the sky. Now is the time. If you don't get it now, you better eat your birthday cake while you can get it. I'm just telling you, I'm not going to wait until I get in a nursing home to have somebody to serve me and enjoy myself. I'm going to enjoy myself right now, where I can put my own clothes on, go where I want to go, when I want to go it. I'm having my party today. I'm not going to wait for a special day. I celebrate the King of Kings and Lord of Lords right now. I carry my party with me. Here's something that I want you to realize, that every obstacle ahead of us can be overcome. Every obstacle that is ahead of us can be overcome. And if you aren't willing to fail, I'm just here to tell you, you won't go very far in life if you're not willing to fail. You know, T. Reuben said that the problem is not that there are problems. The problem is expecting otherwise and thinking that having problems is a problem. Sometimes when you think of your life, you can be honest with yourself and about yourself, but positive at the same time. I heard one lady say, she said, I am far from perfect, she said, but I'm worth it. And you have to take that attitude sometime, that I'm far from perfect, but I'm worth it. Far from perfect, but I'm worth it. Visa Decline said that God sends a perfect little storm to show us how imperfect we are at rowing alone. It's amazing. And now that I've seen my future, I've decided to move out of my present situation. The moment that you see your future, you can make a decision to move out of your present. Augustine said this. He said, trust the past to God's mercy. Trust it to God's mercy. Trust the present to God's love. And trust the future to God's providence. There's some things that God has for you in your future. Don't stress about it in your life. Don't stress about it. Don't even stress about it. You know, walk with God, walk with God, walk with God. I brought today a little thing that I'll call a crucible. And I want to show you that a crucible, say crucible. It sounds like crucifixion, doesn't it? Because it means that something has to die. But I want you to notice the definition here for crucible. It is a place where two elements come together under great pressure to create something new that is more valuable than the original two elements. It is a place where two elements come together under great pressure. Say pressure. If God is ever going to do anything great in your life is going to come under the pressure. Two elements. And you don't realize, if you don't understand God's purpose, you will try to abort it. And you have to understand that there's something that God wants to make out of you that is greater, and God will put two elements in the crucible of affliction. That's why Maya Angelou said I wouldn't take nothing from a journey, because she realized that it's everything that I went through that has made me who I am. It's because of the crucible. I hate to see people that look at you and want what you have, but not willing to pay the price that you paid. They have no understanding that God will put your life in a crucible, under pressure, something that crushes it, breaks it. But the two elements that he puts together become more valuable because he blends the two into one, so that they lose their distinction and the one that he creates them to be. A diamond is formed under the pressure. It's coal that is formed under pressure. If there were no pressure, you'd have no diamonds. And the diamond, the thing that is of greater worth and value, comes into manifestation because it is packed under pressure. And there are some things that God wants to make out of you. He'll put your life, as it were, in a crucible. For some of you, the crucible is your marriage. For this cause shall a man leave his mother and his father, Genesis 2:24. And there has to be a crushing, because as long as it's your will, and no, your will, and it's got to be your way, and you got to always be right. God says, I will bring such pressure on you to the degree that I will smear the lines where you can't tell what's his and what's hers. I will so crush the two together, bringing them under pressure where they will have to lock hands together to realize that we are really one. I will bring under this crucible of intense heat the pressure that makes you want to run the other way, the pressure that makes you want to get out, the pressure that makes you want to resign, that wants you to quit. But God says, no, 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 I'm not accepting resignations today, because his retirement plan is out of this world. You will be glad that you didn't resign, because God says, I'm going to make something better. I'm going to put two elements in this crucible. I don't know who I'm talking to today, but I feel that some folks' lives are in a crucible, and God is bringing pressure on you, intense heat, and he's crushing the two and causing them to lose identity so that they blend into one and they stop fighting each other. And peace comes because the two shall become one. And the ones that really are closer bonded together, it doesn't mean that they've never had any trouble. It means that they've been through hell and high water. And because of all that they've been through, they said, you better not think about leaving me now. If you think of leaving me now, you better call the morgue, because of everything that they have put you through, and you have been in the crucible being molded, and there comes a pestle that is put into the mortar. This is called a mortar, and this is a pestle. It is the pressure that comes and it crushes the two until the substance that is made here is more usable and more valuable than the separate entities before they were even put here. And God brings a refinement to our lives. We are coarse before God brings us into the pestle, into the mortar. Mortar sounds like mortal, which means death doomed. It's the same word where we get the word mortgage, where you pay until you die. Wouldn't it be wonderful if you could get it paid off and burn the mortgage? I wish that they'd make a law that once you burn the mortgage, that it's unlawful to tax. Wouldn't that be wonderful? I wish I could get a few people that would sign a petition. I would. But there are some things that God is trying to put you in. You don't even understand why God puts you in a situation with somebody so differently from you. Because if he puts you in a situation where somebody was so much alike with you, you'd never become of greater value. It's the contrast of the difference blended in the two. It is when what we're nothing but water, H2O, 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part water. God takes hydrogen and oxygen, puts them together, and from that comes the more valuable substance of the water, the H2O that we are able to drink. It's because the two come into one. I cannot tell you how powerful it is when two things come into oneness. Where if there are any two that shall agree on any one thing that they shall ask. I cannot tell you that every time that we partake of communion, we are being put in the crucible once again of where the blood and the body are now coming back into the same crucible. And God, in what he takes what was separated in death and brings them back together in life, and they become the mitochondria of the Christian. That's your real powerhouse of where you come and accept the Lord, build a house. Except the Lord build a family, your family will fall to pieces. Except the Lord build your business will frustrate you, and you'll die and leave your business in the hands of fools. Except the Lord build a house. Except the Lord watches the city. The watchman watches but in vain. There's something that God can build and something that God sees working collaboratively with you. Working with you. God wants to build your family. Let him be the partner. Unless God be in this thing. If God were not in it, you would have walked out a long time ago. I'm so glad that God is an element in your marriage. I'm glad that God is a powerful partner in your business. I'm glad that he's a partner in our city, so that we can say, unless the Lord, that this is not through human effort alone that this is sustained. It is because I'm willing to go into the furnace of affliction and be crushed in a crucible. And I'm willing to have things that were distinct to melt into a new thing that is worth, to take the two elements that are melted together in a crucible and make it more valuable than either one as they were separate before. There's something that God is melting down in your life.
Thank you for watching Power for Living with Bishop Dale C. Bronner. Until next time, God bless you.